Hi folks, Doug Sloat here, CYO Pro Staffer, and today's Tutorial Tuesday. And we're going to talk about different types of baits we use out here at CYO. So we're going to do just the few categories, and we're going to start with the first one. Okay, so the first bait that we have is what we call a senko. It's a finesse bait. Usually you're going to tie that in with a extra wide gap worm hook, which will be a size 2 or 3/0 based on the size of the baits. The senko itself is loaded with salt, so it'll actually sink. I usually tie this up with the hook and no weight and just cast it as is. Two ways you can rig this. The first way is what we call a Texas rig. So I'm going to take the hook and we're going to find the fattest part of the worm, which is right up the front here. You're going to send the hook through 1/8 of an inch or so down, and you're going to bring it out the side. Slide it all the way down until you get up to that little bend, and it's going to tuck right into the worm itself. And then we're going to do a little trick that's going to make it weedless. We're going to send it back just to the length of the hook. As we pull it out, you see how that buries right in there, so it's weedless. You don't get stuck on anything. And you can cast that just like that, or you can add weight to it. But normally these are just fine, this is the way they are. The second way I like to rig that hook, that senko, is what we call a wacky rig. And you could do wackies a couple different ways, but out here we're going to run it this way because we don't have to run the wacky ring. So we're going to find the bulb of the worm, which is right here. If you see this little fat spot, we're going to go right behind the bulb. We're going to send the hook straight through and push it all the way down. And then we're going to bring it right back up on itself, and that's going to be wacky. I like to keep that point just barely poking out, so that way it's still somewhat weedless, but as you swim it, it's going to be wacky. So those would be the two styles we use on the senkos. All right, the next bait we like to use is again a finesse bait. It's still a plastic, but it's a crawdad imitation. So as you can tell, it looks just like a crawdad. Many colors available based on water clarity and things like that, but usually I do darker colors when it's stained water and lighter colors when it's clearer water. We also pair that up with another 2/0 or 3/0 extra wide gap hook. The nice thing about the wide gap is when you have a bigger bait, it doesn't overpower the hook. So we like to run this with a weight, since it's going to be super light. Doesn't have any salt in it, and I run what they call a bullet weight. You simply slide this bullet weight onto your line before you tie on to your hook. Once you're tied on, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to do a Texas rig, just like we did with the senko. We're going to send it through and out the side, and then we're going to tuck that crook right into the worm itself, and then you're going to go ahead and pull back a little meat, bring it right back through, and then leave it just like that so it's somewhat weedless. And then the bullet weight, that's what's going to help you cast that out there. So the bullet weight locks up against the hook eye, but what it does, it slides up and down. So once the weight hits the water, it's going to sink, and this is going to stay a little bit higher up. And then if there's a lot of weeds down here, the weight's in the weeds, but your crawdad's right above, and you just simply jig it and swim it right across the bottom. And then of course this weight's free floating, so when you do get bit, it's going to pull the line and the fish won't feel the weight as easy. And that is a plastic rigging on the crawdad. The bait next is going to be a jig. This is more like a swim jig. Based on the way the front is, it's going to have a little swim head on there. They do other styles of jigs, which will be a standard jig, which is going to be more blunt, where the jig will sit off the bottom like so. But you can cast these and still jig them off the bottom, or you can swim them. These jigs are nice because it has a nice big skirt, really heavy lead head. They have built-in rattles, so they make noise that attracts the fish. You can swim them, bounce them off the rocks, or you can just let them sink to the bottom and hop them. And sometimes they'll sit there, and if you twitch them, they give a nice action. I pair that with a swimming plastic on here, so it has a little paddle tail. And so when it does swim, that paddle tail moves, gives it some bulk too, so that way it looks like a good meal for a fish. There is a built-in weed guard right here, so that way when you get into the weeds, it kind of keeps it nice and clean. But that is one way that I'll swim the jig, or I'll actually jig it. It's really good to throw on the beds of bass that are bedding. They'll just come and grab it, pick it up, try to swim away with it and spit it out. But that's another good finesse bait there. The next bait that we're going to talk about is a swim bait, or a pro swimmer that we call. It is a plastic bait. It does have a paddle tail on it, and we usually pair that with some kind of lead head jig or swim bait jig. What I have here is a similar lead head jig, but it has that crook in it, so it'll lock into place and still be somewhat weedless. These can be fished in finesse matter, or they can be swam too, used as a search bait. Same way we rig it, we're going to still do a Texas rig. You always look at your paddle. You want your paddle facing down, so that's the way it swims. So I'm going to drop the hook through the nose and come out the front, and then I know when I send this back, I'm going to twist it around, then the belly is going to have this little slit right there, and that's going to be a perfect center point to lock your point of your hook up. And then we're going to send it back through and make it weedless again. And then that's how you would cast that. You can cast it and jig it, or you can just cast it and swim it. It's going to look just like a little bait fish. Bait fish have a nice white belly on them. It's very, very common for most of your predators to go after bait fish that are injured. You can jig it and make it look like it's injured, or just swim it like it just broke away from a schooling bait fish. And that's how you would set up a swim bait. Okay, so the next bait is what I like to call search baits. Search baits are something that I like to use to cover water fast. I want to see if there's any active fish out there that I can just get into really quick. Just like our last video in casting, you want to fan cast these and cover water and cover area and move down a bank or something like that to see if there's any active fish. This bait is called a chatterbait. You can also do it with a spinner bait. But the chatterbait is a standard jig that has a plow blade or a shovel blade on the front. As it swims, that blade moves back and forth and gives a nice vibration. And then you have this bulk of the jig I paired it with a crawtail. So it looks like there's spinning crawtails in the back. And I can just cover a lot of water with these and find fish that are just going to be really active eating, and see if I can't get my success rate up a little bit quicker. Next category of baits will be crankbaits. Crankbaits are going to be shallow divers and deep divers. We'll talk about the shallow diver. This version here is a shallow diver. You can tell by the lip. The lip has got a really, really shallow bill on it, but it's square. With another name for it would be a square bill. The square bill is kind of nice because when you're in the shallow water and you're hitting rocks, they tend to deflect and they don't dig into anything. They do have rattles built in to make a lot of noise, and again, you can cover a lot of water quick with these and just try to find those fish that are super active. The side of the square bill, you have a deep diver, so if you want to cover deeper water, then you have something like this, which is going to have a longer bill, really fat front, so it dives a lot deeper. They still swim and make a lot of action, but you can hear the rattles in there. The fish's lateral line will pick that up and get them curious, but this will get into the deeper depths. But when I run crankbaits, there's two things I like to either use. I use a crank snap or a swivel. A swivel is just something that you can attach to your line with a little clip, and it's easy to change baits really fast without having to tie on all the time. They also make what they call a crank snap, which doesn't have the swivel here, and it's just a quick snap. You can also use that as for your crankbaits, and that would be also good to be categorized as search baits, deep or shallow. The next version of a crankbait is what we call a lipless bait. If you look at this one, there is no lip, so it doesn't dive as deep, but it's really, really heavy. It'll dive deep just by letting it sink. And it does make a lot of noise and gives an erratic action. These also can be jigged vertically. If you want to jig them vertically, or as you're ripping them in, you can jig them in, but you can let them sink to the bottom and bring them up, cover a lot of water, or you can keep your rod tip up and reel them a little fast and cover shallow water. Lipless crankbaits are also something very good for catching bass out here at CYO. The last category we're going to talk about is topwater. So this is what we have as a topwater bait. It floats. There's still a ton of treble hooks on there, but as it floats and you retrieve it, this has a prop on the back. So as you reel in, that prop's going to create noise. It's almost like a little plopping sound. You can reel it in and stop it, and pause it. You can jerk it a little bit to give a quick prop speed, slow prop speed. You find the right cadence, and that's when the fish usually bust on it. when you fish topwater, there's very important that when they do hit on it, you want to wait at like a split second. You want that fish to grab the bait and then take it under the surface of water, and that's when you want to set the hook. You don't want to set the hook as soon as you see him crash the bait, because all you're going to do is pull it out of his mouth. But topwaters are really effective when in morning, when there's a low light, or in the evening, or if there's overcast that's low light all day and there's not a lot of waves, topwater is very effective. All right, so after we showed you all the baits, my go-to baits at CYO. Definitely a wacky worm. It's a finesse bait again. I love to fish a wacky worm, especially when fish are getting kind of finicky. But then I also like to use the chatter bait or spinner bait. Those two baits are going to be super weedless. You can fish them fast, you can fish them slow. But these two baits at CYO would be my first go-tos. So that will be the end of the segment. Be sure to like and subscribe. I'm Doug Sloat, pro staffer out here at CYO. Hey, when you're at CYO, spending time with family or friends, it's time well spent.